Hey everybody, it's Professor Snart here. Okay, so we are into unit, I forget the number, I think it's 8. Basically the wrap up of your group project. And so in some ways this is, I wouldn't say the easiest unit that we do, but I think it's the most straightforward. There's only one thing that you're responsible for, so we spent time at the tail end of Unit 6, right, connecting with our group members. Unit 7 was primarily like a building unit, or at least drafting, right, early drafting. And now Unit 8 gives your group a chance to just finish up the group project. There's no reply component here, there's nothing else going on except just finishing up the project. But I do want to highlight that it's due because it's sort of like the main work for this unit. It is due by that first due date for Unit 8, and I'll pop into those in just a second here. But again, there's really nothing that you need to do except for repost the link to your project, your Google Slides, I think is what most people did. So that link really won't change since you posted it in Unit 7, but it's just a convenient way for me to collect them here for grading purposes. Most people's group projects should have their name on that first slide, like all the group members' names. But it's really useful for me if you post when one person posts from that group to make sure that everybody's name is included in the subject line, just again so I can account for everybody in the class. So again, just reposting the URL, there's nothing extra that you've got to do. Including everyone's name in the subject line is really helpful. And then that's pretty much it. So again, not easy because obviously you're still working on the project itself, but pretty straightforward. One of the other things that I wanted to draw your attention to is that I've always tried to provide the objectives for each unit, and these are drawn right from our English 1152 course objectives, which I think I've mentioned before are not just our particular class objectives, but any English 1152 that any student would take, whether it's online, face-to-face, 12-week, 8-week, 16, whatever term it might be. They all look to cover the same objective. So these aren't unique to our course. These are kind of a way of making sure that every 1152 class is covering the same or working towards the same basic objectives. Now, what you study, which particular poets or poems, and how you go about doing that might be different, but the objectives are all the same. Always the same across those various versions of 1152. But what you might notice is that, and maybe truthfully this goes for almost every unit that we've done, but as I build them into our sort of later units in the course, it's almost every single one that we do every single time, and it's sort of hard to unbundle them, especially for something like the group project. Obviously, right, just by virtue of the thing, we're looking at a wide range of poems. Obviously looking at, right, those common elements, whether it's imagery, meter, figures of speech, is sort of what makes poetry. Clearly analyzing, right, those elements and presenting that to an audience, right, your classmates. Evaluating understanding poetry, and then again, especially because for the group thing we're doing not just the poems, but poets as well, and their kind of personal life stories and how they existed as public, cultural, historical figures, or continue to exist in some cases. We're obviously thinking about, right, personal and public values of poetry. And then part of what everyone's doing for the group project is speaking, even though it's a group project, you are speaking kind of individually about what these poems or poets mean to you and why they speak to you and why they're interesting to you. So what you'll see is that as the units go by, we just cover kind of the same basic ones over and over again. And again, I don't see that as a problem. And ultimately, it's hard to even piece individual ones out and just kind of do one without like accidentally doing the others. So it's just something kind of interesting to notice. Okay, so again, Unit 8, pretty straightforward. We'll take a quick look at the due dates then. So we're looking at Wednesday, November 1st, right, after everyone's had as much candy as they can possibly eat for Halloween. And then obviously you want to sort of take a look at our due dates moving forward. We really don't have that much ground to cover yet. What with Thanksgiving, this time of the year tends to get really busy, I guess, stressful in some ways, because not only do you have other classes potentially that are wrapping up with major projects that are due and just kind of a lot on your plate as far as school goes, but people tend to have a lot of whether it's travel plans or just like lots of family things going on. So it's a fun time of the year, I think, for a lot of folks, but it is also stressful because there are so many things, school and non-school, going on. So it's good to be kind of extra aware of that coming up and just even more vigilant about time management and due dates and that kind of stuff. So I'm going to walk us through a couple of our next units. Here, reminding that one of them coming up now is Unit 10, which we've been thinking about hopefully almost from the get-go, where you're being asked to attend a poetry or poetry-related event. And again, there's been this link here in our course menu with a list of events, various things. So this is one I mentioned before, a really good one. It's local to COD. You can even participate directly. You don't just have to go as an observer necessarily. So this is a good option, a read-in. I've posted a few other things, right? This play. I know that other people have posted a few things. This talk on campus, again, is it a poetry event? Not really, but it involves a local author, right? It's sort of, in the ballpark, let's say. So be sure you're on the lookout for something that you can attend, and even if you wanted to look into Unit 10, which is what I'm going to do in just a second, you can get the sense of like what you have to do as part of attending this poetry event. If you're not sure if the event that you have in mind is going to work, then you can always email me. But given the fact that this has been on your radar from almost the start of our course, I truthfully don't tend to be very lenient if you say at the 11th hour that, oh, you just couldn't find anything. Okay, end of story for that. All right. So finishing up the group project for Unit 8, and then there's no reply component, right, to the group project in Unit 8 itself. We did that as part of the drafting phase here in Unit 7, not in Unit 8, but we actually have a kind of response component that makes up the entirety of Unit 9. So there's lots of explanation here, but basically what I want us to do is to engage with people's group projects in a little more dynamic way than just the discussion board. Hey, this was great. I learned about whoever, Charles Bukowski, and I never knew about him before, so thanks. Right? That's interesting, right? It's good that we learn about new stuff, but we're going to do this a little bit differently here. So it's still a reply to or extension of or reflection of. I like this phrase here, your project made me think of, and then we fill in that blank. And we're going to use this Padlet tool, which we've used before, where you visit the URL on your mobile phone, so open up a browser on your phone, type in the URL here for our Unit 9 project, and then you, again, doing this as a mobile assignment, so really trying to keep your eye out for things in the real world that you just encounter, not that you even seek out necessarily, but just that you encounter on a day-to-day basis, that somehow make you think of one of the group members' projects, not your own. And so you're going to capture that in a picture, making sure that you, most important, include your name in it, again, just for grading purposes, and then maybe a little brief text about like what poet or poem or group project this is actually connecting back to. Because this isn't really designed as like a text or a writing tool, this Padlet tool, I don't expect tons of description here, but obviously we need a name and we need something that indicates like what this picture is connecting us back to. So it is a reply component of a sort, but you'll see that it's really not, it's much more dynamic and hopefully engaging. And it's really more about kind of extending the thinking that's happened in the project. And one of the things that I'll do once everybody posts in Unit 8, I will recollect those links and provide them right here in Unit 9 as well, just so you have them, again, easily accessible and you're not having to click between units to get the various projects that you can look at. So you'll see it, the Padlet develop here. I've embedded it in Blackboard, but it's best to use it as a standalone link here that you just would go to on your phone. And I'll email this out so you have it, again, at least a little bit more available rather than having to somehow come into Blackboard and get it that way. So again, we're not looking for like completely literal connections here. That really is just like you're extending the thinking or some of the ideas that came out of the various group projects, not your own. And again, we're looking for at least 3 separate projects that you're reflecting on or extending the thinking of through the use of this Padlet tool. Like I said, I'll email this link out relatively soon so you have it a little bit more accessible. And if you can just have it on your phone, like open the browser up and just type it in at some convenient downtime that you've got, then you've got it there, so you can pull it up if you do happen to run into something that kind of reminds you of one of the group projects. So you'll notice that in doing this, one of the things that it kind of forces you to do is engage with the projects to enough of a degree that you kind of remember like what they were. So you don't just discussion board it and a quick response and then you sort of forget what it is you were even looking at. You almost have to have a little bit of a working knowledge of all of the various projects and the poets or the poems that they covered, or at least a few that sort of stick with you, that you can then be on the lookout in your real life, your normal everyday life, for things, little moments or scenes or pictures you can capture or whatever it happens to be that, made you think of whatever the group project might have been. So once again, we'll look at our due dates here, getting a little bit further forward. So we've looked at Unit 8, that November 1st. Again, the Padlet really should be due November 8th, since it's kind of the only main work for that. And that will give us time then to look at Unit 10, which is the attending a poetry event. So let's just look really quickly at that. Getting us a little far ahead, but it's always good to be looking at what's on the horizon, not just the immediate, but long-term as well. Okay, so pretty straightforward. You've attended by this point a poetry event or some poetry-related event. All you're going to do is post, right? Tell us about it, what the event was, where it was, what all was involved. Hopefully you can capture some pictures or video and get that as well. It's awesome if you're able to participate, if it's like an open mic or like the poetry or the Veterans Read-In, for example, where they actively encourage people to be the readers. But obviously, you tend to play. You're not going to stand up and do the Romeo and Juliet famous balcony scene. I would strongly encourage you not to do that. So clearly not every opportunity is going to be a participation opportunity. And then obviously, especially for stuff like that, professional or semi-professional performances, abide by whatever. Please do not record or take photographs or whatever during their performance. That if they have any rules about that, clearly follow those. So here, we're back to our double due dates. We're back into our more traditional discussion board. You're posting about your event and then replying to others. So again, our due dates, looking at Unit 10, getting fairly far forward now, that Wednesday the 15th, and then a couple of days to reply. Then we have that Thanksgiving break built into our course, and then just a couple of units left. I should also say that for the attend a poetry event, the Unit 10, if you happen to know people in our course, either just from outside of our course or maybe from the group project or whatever other circumstances, you're more than welcome to attend events together. It's not like everybody has to find and attend a totally separate one. So sometimes it's more fun to go with the buddy. Okay, so that gets us beyond just our current Unit 8, a couple of units forward. I'll certainly check in before then, but as always, if you have questions or concerns, or especially if the whole group dynamic thing is causing you a little aggravation or problem, certainly be in touch with me. One of the other things that I guess I'll show you really quickly here, and this is a bit of a gamble since I'm not sure if it's going to work. So this is where people posted just their project in draft form. And hopefully I grab one that actually works. I'll go into Gianna's group here. You'll notice that where I was able to, I actually embedded the thing right in Blackboard. It just makes it a little bit easier to see. But I'm going to follow it to its source here. And I had previously asked you to share your projects with me. It always takes me to the wrong account, so I go into the right one. So I'd ask to have the project shared with me. Part of what that lets me do is this whole publish to the web or embedding. You guys can do that too, but just easy for me to do. One of the things that I can look at, and I don't really unless there's reason to, is the editing or revision history. So in Google, like Docs or Sheets, I think does it, and then their version of PowerPoint, Google Slides here, it lets you look at the editing history of the thing. So again, oh, it's probably off my screen to the right. Dang it. Anyway, if you do the same thing, you'll see what I'm seeing. It shows me all of the editing moments, back to when it was first created, when the first slides were added, and if we look at some of the other ones, obviously they've mapped out what they're going to do. It lets me see when other pieces of text were added and who was doing it. So again, it's not something that I actively seek out. I assume that people have been keeping up with the work and contributing to the group. But if there's sort of like an issue that comes up, this is the first place I go to see when was the doc created and who are the people that have been consistently working in it. So again, just an FYI, I suppose we could say. Okay, back to it. Long announcement this time, but it gets us a few units forward. And again, if you're having issues of any kind or questions, concerns, just be in touch with me.